What I really want to focus on here today is the method and what I like to call our mise en place, which I'll get into in a minute. So the real elements to fundraising method that matter is investing time and energy in those relationships, obviously. Early on, which we're starting to get through this window, you may have heard Anna or others say you're not ready to be fundraising, so don't think about it right now. That was true because you were focused on engaging with your mentors and like really getting your business pointed in the right direction. You're getting to the point now where you are ready to start thinking about fundraising and actually need to start doing some work on it, even if you're not taking pitch meetings yet. So know when you're fundraising and when you're not. Before you start, having all of your materials ready. And this is what I really want to emphasize for the rest of this talk. It is human nature to think, I'm going to pitch, I know the 5 investors I really want to work with. I'm going to spend my time right now reaching out to those investors, and I think I'll get one of them. And if those don't work, then I'll start building the rest of my pipeline and working toward it. I want to encourage you to not do that. I want to encourage you to really put the work in up front and have those 5 or 6 investors you really want to work with as part of your process, but don't go all in assuming you're going to close them. And what you don't want to do is be stuck behind the 8 ball, not having all your materials ready, and then start getting asks of, I need to see this, or I need to see that, or I need to see this, and you don't have any of that material ready, and you're having to build it on the fly in the midst of your fundraising process. One thing, again, I'll try to remind you is every time you see an article in Crunchbase or wherever, that's after all the negotiation happened. That's after all the market activity around the business happened. That is not the first pitch that founder went out with necessarily. So remember that everything you read is post-negotiation. It's not where the round started. We really, through experience, have found that the more you can start at a more entry point to a round, the market dynamic will push a round up. The last thing you want is to start too high and your round feels stale and no one ever wants to engage. And there's no such thing as a half-raised round, right? You either raise the round or the round doesn't happen. And so the more you start in a way that can build momentum, the more likely you are to make that round happen. Okay, the mise en place. So the investor pipeline. This is a lightweight list of investor targets that you think you want to go after. You may not have pathways to right now that you want to actually share with your mentors and your key allies. So this is essentially just a simple Excel or Google Sheet, spreadsheet of who you're trying to target and why. And I'm going to break down what that looks like, but this, again, is something that you're going to share externally. This is not what you're going to actually use to drive your fundraising process. It's what you're going to use to first solicit help and intros. And it's going to be your kind of kicking off point to getting your fundraising process started. Process starter email. Again, I have every piece of material you need in here, even really simple things like copies of emails. Because I want you to have this stuff as templatized as possible. And I want you to, I don't know how many people are using just a simple sort of email autocomplete application, but there's really good sort of snippets, software and things like that you can install. Like Streak has one readily available that just allows you to write at one time, and then from then on you can hit a little keyboard shortcut and it'll drop in the text. So it makes it real easy to send emails like this multiple times to people. But the process starter email is the one you're going to use to actually engage your key mentors that says, hey, I'm about to start fundraising. Here's who I think I want to target, and here's how I think you can be helpful to me. I'd love to hop on a phone call and have that conversation, right? Got a sample copy of that here in a minute. Your investor CRM is an actual CRM. So whether you're using Streak or whether you're using HubSpot or whether you're using a full Salesforce instance or Pipedrive, whatever you use, you actually want to use a CRM to manage your investor process. And I'll tell you why. It's fine to do it in just your inbox or in your spreadsheet. If you do hit that magical, like I have 5 investors I want to target and I magically think I'm going to close my round with just 5. If you do, more power to you, and that's awesome. The reality of it is, by the time you're engaging investor number 45 in your round, you're going to lose status of where you are in the process with each of them. Are you on the 3rd meeting? Is this investor leaning in but wants to make sure they've reviewed your financial model? Is this investor says yes, but they need you to meet their 3rd partner a week from next Tuesday, right? This investor is saying, hey, I'm interested, but before I do that, I want to come take an office tour before I can decide to bring you to my full partner meeting 2 Mondays from now. Right, like, all that stuff is going to fly out of context if you don't actually log it somewhere. The only way to do that in a way that's really organized is in a CRM. So I can't advocate enough. If you don't use a CRM to manage your business today from a sales perspective, at least start by using it for your first fundraising process. Forwardable email. If you're wanting to get in front of someone, you want to send a forwardable email to the person who's going to help make that introduction for you. It needs to be so simple that from their phone at 30,000 feet in the air, they can just literally hit forward and say, hey, investor Anna, thought you might really have interest in this company. I've been spending some time with the Techstars and they're awesome. Send. That's all they have to do, right? Like, you want to make it so simple. What you don't want to do is make it to where they're having to edit anything or do anything that's going to cause them to snooze that thing in their inbox. I can't tell you how many emails I have snoozed in my inbox right now just because the last time I've sat down with my full laptop in front of me in an easy editable mode was like 2 weeks ago, the last time I was on a cross-country flight. I think I have 200 emails queued up for tomorrow for my flight to New York to deal with at the same time, right? So make it really easy where they can do it on the go from their phone. A one-pager about your company. Not required, but really helpful, right? I actually am a big believer in a one-pager over a pitch deck for just a very initial intro email, right? Just a simple PDF that outlines the basic tenets of your business, the basic tenets of your team, and any high-level traction, right? Just very simple that you can include in your initial email. And remember, one thing to keep in mind when you're reaching out to investors, you have to get that first investor interested, but then they often, if they decide they like you, they have to be your champion across their team of partners, right? So the more you're giving them to help them do that, the better. In your initial set of outreach, you don't want to give them so much that you're revealing your entire business to someone who may just say no. But a little bit of a teaser to where it gives them something to share with their team or something to just remember what they talked about with you, I think is a good thing. Which leads me to the emailable deck. I actually think you want to be careful with this. I don't encourage you to send a deck in your initial email that you send to anybody, a full pitch deck. I think that's something you send upon request. You will get some investors who say hey, the first forwarded email comes out and the response will be, can you send a deck over? Which is fine. If you really want to engage that investor, go ahead and send that deck. So don't be weird about the deck, but I also make sure, unless you're pretty far down the path with someone, you want to be careful with how much data you're revealing in your pitch deck, because you have to assume it's going to make its way around the industry, right? People aren't doing it to be evil, but they may send it on to someone, hey, can you give me some thoughts on this? Or, hey, have you ever come across this founder before? And they're just forwarding your email without, forgetting the deck was attached or whatever reason. Just assume that deck is going to make its way out there. On that note, a lot of founders do choose to use DocSend. A lot of investors don't like DocSend, which is, it's an online deck software that actually tracks who's viewing it and why and how long they're viewing, not why, how long they're viewing a given slide. The reason a lot of investors don't like DocSend is for the very reason I mentioned about airplanes. A lot of us get to our email when we're on flights, and if you're having to wait for a DocSend deck to load on airplane Wi-Fi, that browser is just as good as closed, sadly. So that's why I like PDF attachments, because all that stuff syncs in advance before you get on a flight, for what it's worth. Meeting deck, different than the emailable deck. More detailed, more information, more of your financial model. You want to actually go into more of your plan in a meeting deck, which is something that you're actually going to sit down and bring out in a meeting with an investor. And then, the question is, do you follow up with that full deck? My response is you've got to kind of judge on how far down the path you really are with that investor. If you're going to really reveal all of your financials and everything in a way that's out of your control, you want to do so somewhat cautiously. Same with a financial model. Very important. I think the more up-to-date that is, the more it will help in your fundraising conversations. You want to be able to do things like an investor says, hey, I don't believe that your customer acquisition cost is $30. In my experience, it's going to be more like $70. And you can be like, okay, let's adjust our assumptions and see what that does to our plan. Or, hey, here are the underlying drivers of that customer acquisition cost. Let me show you the assumptions we have so you can understand how we got to that number. And it just, again, it creates credibility, which is as important as anything in this process. Cap table obviously is going to be necessary as you enter diligence. So you want to make sure your cap table is up to date and is something that you're comfortable sharing. The last thing you want is them to be totally excited, ready to go, and then you've got a mess of a cap table and it takes another month and a half to close because they have to make the numbers square off. Just have all of that stuff ready to go. Work with that in advance with your in-house, with your counsel and your attorney, and just get that ready to go. And then finally, the data room. A data room is essentially just a collection of most of these materials that I mentioned. Right? A data room is just going to be a shared drive on Dropbox or Box.com or whatever you want to use that just contains your financial model, your cap table, the bios of your team, your actual pitch deck. If you have any IP documents like patents filed or anything like that, you'd want to include it in your data room. And then use the data room as an opportunity to put in front of the investor anything else you want them to know. If you have a point of view on the competitive dynamics in your industry, have a little deck on competitive dynamics. If you have a point of view on, what's going to happen in terms of regulation changes in your industry, or you have articles about regulation changes that are happening that you want to put there, just drop those in your data room as PDFs, right? So use the data room as a little bit of fact information, but also, there may be some marketing materials for your company you want to drop in there just to help your story along, because that'll be something they'll look at in there. That'll be something that they'll look at, sort of as they continue to dive in and diligence you. It really is important to keep your investor pipeline, which is what you share with your mentors and is just a spreadsheet, separate from your actual CRM that you're actually using to drive your fundraising process. And I've got examples of both of those here, so you'll see the stark differences.